Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Nun Gimel begins the fifth parak of Masechta Shabbos, parak Kesed Ma'aber, and it actually starts the last two lines on Daf Nun Beis. The parak is primarily focusing on how you measure the borders of a city and how you measure the tchumin, which is 2,000 amma belt around the borders of the city. So that's what we'll be starting with in the Mishnah, but the Gemara quickly goes into Agadata because we have an issue with what exactly is the correct word used in the Mishnah. It's a Machlokes Rav and Shmuel that'll launch us into four other arguments between Rav and Shmuel across many various different subjects. The Gemara will then get into the wisdom of Rav Aishia, Beribi, the wisdom of the earlier generations versus the later generations. We'll go back to discussing the precise language of the Mishnah, and we will therefore bring up what is the precise language that the people of Yehuda used as opposed to the people of Galil, who used imprecise language, and various reasons why the people of Yehuda were able to hold on to their learning more than the people of the Galil. Then we'll talk about speech in general. We'll have some examples of people who speak generally foolishly and unclearly and how that caused them trouble. We'll have some examples of people who spoke very much with wisdom and clarity, the 5 different incidents of someone who hinted at something with wisdom and chachma. Then Rav Yeshua ben Hananiah gives 3 examples of how he was defeated in his use of words, and the Gemara ends with a story about Beruria. So first of all, the Mishnah, which begins the chapter, the Mishnah discusses how you measure the borders of a city. So you have to know the borders of the city in order to count the tchum from outside the borders of the city. So we're here discussing a walled city, and the Mishnah primarily teaches the halacha that the borders have to be a straight line. So it says even if there are parts of the border that go in and out, the wall has houses, let's say the wall is formed from houses and some stick in and some stick out, or it's formed from bricks, but there are some areas where it is indented or outdented by towers, or you have some kind of structures that are attached to the outside of the wall, like decrepit buildings, or even buildings which are built on top of graves or graveyards that have enough space for people to live in. All these things connect to the borders of the city, but you have to draw a straight line. So you take the furthermost part that sticks out, and then you draw a straight line along the length of the city down to the opposite corner. And therefore, you could have one tiny thing that sticks out, but it causes the border to move much further along the entire length of the city itself. And then you actually go ahead and measure the 2,000 amas from that line. And that 2,000 amas is measured in a square or a rectangle. It's not measured in a circle, meaning you don't wrap it precisely to the borders of the city. You don't round off the corners. You allow a larger space than 2,000 amas in the corner because the corner is always 1/3 longer than the length of the width of the strip itself. Okay, that's the Mishnah. And the Gemara immediately launches into a discussion. What is the correct term in the Mishnah? What it said, you expand the borders of the city. The word that was used was ma'abrin, and the question is that ma'abrin with an ayin, meaning from the word ibor, like pregnant, meaning to say that you make the city pregnant, you make it expand, like a woman expands when she's pregnant, or is it referring to, is it spelled with an aleph, and then it's like the word aver, meaning limbs, that you add limbs to the border, which is the proper terminology here. Rav and Shmuel argue about it. Now Rav and Shmuel have a number of other machlokes, and first of all, what is Ma'aras HaMachpelah? Why is it called the double cave? One says it's because it was 2 caves, one behind the other, and the other one says it was 2 caves, one on top of the other. Now the Gemara understands that if you have 2 ceilings, it's okay to call it the double cave, but if it's one behind the other, it's just 2 caves lined up. Why would that be called a double? So Gemara says no, the doubling is for a different reason. It's because there were pairs of people buried there. Like we said, that Kiryat Arba, why is it called the city of the 4? 4 pairs of people that are there: Adam and Chava, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. Okay, next Machlokes is about Amraphel. Amraphel is one of the kings that Avram Avinu fought against. Amraphel is Nimrod. Rav and Shmuel have Machlokes is what his real name is and what he was called. According to one, his name was Nimrod. He was called Amraphel because he told Avram Avinu fall into the fire at Or Chazdim. According to the other one, his name was Amraphel. He was called Nimrod because he made a mered against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Next Machlokes is Vayakom El-Chadash Al-Mitzrayim. Rav and Shmuel, one say that is a real new king. The old king had passed away. He died. And that is based on the fact that it says Chadash, it says a new king. The other one says, no, it can't be that it's a new king because it doesn't say that the other one died. It just says new king. It just means that he had new decrees, he made new rules, The Gemara asks, how could it say they didn't know Yosef if he wasn't really a new king? The Gemara says, he made himself as if he didn't know Yosef, didn't have any gratitude to what Yosef had done for him in Mitzrayim. Okay, now, back to the subject of what the proper text of the Mishnah is with an ayin. Is it ma'abrin with an ayin, ma'abrin with an aleph? Rav Yochanan says, I spent 18 days growing up in the yeshiva of Rav Oishia Beribi, the great man of Oishia, and his level of learning was so high that I couldn't understand anything he taught except for one thing, and he taught that the correct text here is ma'abrin with an aleph, not with a ayin. So Gemara says, is that true? Rav Yochanan said elsewhere that there were 12 Talmidim there, and he learned the nature of each of the Talmidim while he was there for the 18 days. He learned about each student, he learned how wise he was, he learned about his heart, he learned about his wisdom. So I can say he didn't learn anything. The Gemara gives a few answers here. The Gemara says either it just means he didn't learn any Gemara, besides for about this Mishnah. What he learned about the personalities of the individuals doesn't count as far as this. Or it can mean that he didn't learn anything from Rav Oishia, other than this one, halacha. The other things he didn't learn from Rav Oishia, he learned from the students. Or it could be that he means he didn't learn anything about this Mishnah. This particular Mishnah, he only learned this one thing about the Aleph. Okay, Rav Yochanan says further, when we used to learn by Rav Oishia, we used to sit, 4 Talmidim would squeeze into one Amma, we would crowd around him so tightly. Rabbi says when we learned by Rav Elazar ben Shemua, we crowded 6 Talmidim into one Amma. Rav Yochanan says about Rav Oishia Beribi, he was as great in his generation as Rav Meir was in his generation, just like nobody understood Rabbi Meir. They couldn't fully fathom his words, they couldn't fully fathom Rav Oishia Beribi either. The Gemara says, Rav Yochanan says that the heart, the wisdom of the early ones are as great as the door of the Ulam. That's the main entrance to the Beis HaMikdash, which was very large. The later generations are still big. They're like the door of the Heichel, which was slightly smaller. And us, compared to all that, we are like the size of a needle, the eye of a needle, just cracked. Who are these Rishayim and Achronim, the early ones and the later ones? So the early ones is Rabbi Akiva, the later ones is Rav Elazar ben Shemua, or possibly the early ones is Rav Elazar ben Shemua, and the later ones is referring to Rav Oishia Beribi, who we've been discussing over here. Now, what's our level? So we're like a eye of a needle. Abaye says that we're like trying to stick your finger into a wall. Just like you can't stick your finger into the wall, we have difficulty getting Gemara into our heads. Rava says we're like trying to stick a finger into hardened wax. You can't get your finger in there. That's how it's difficult for us to understand logic. Svara. Rashi says, as far as forgetting things, that's easy. That's like trying to stick your finger into a well. That's no problem. We forget things right away. That's how the stuff goes out of our head so quickly. Okay, now, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, people from the place of Yehuda were very careful with their language, and therefore their Torah stayed with them. People from Galil were not careful with their language, and therefore they forgot what they learned. The Gemara says, what is the fact that they were careful not to insult people with their words? What does that have to do with anything? The Gemara says, no, that's not what I meant. I meant that they were precise. When they said things over, they used the exact wording that their Rebbe said, and they used mnemonics, and made sure that they taught things in an orderly, they learned things in an orderly fashion, and they remember them in an orderly fashion, and that's why they remember their learning. People from Galil mumbled a lot, and therefore they didn't have it straight. And they didn't make simanim, and they didn't keep their learning. Another reason why the people from Yehuda did well in learning is because they had one Rebbe. Each one learned from one Rebbe, and he had one language. He didn't have to remember a mush of things. People from Galil had multiple Rebbeim, and therefore they heard multiple different versions of the same thing, and it became a mush in their heads, and they didn't remember it. Ravina said that actually it was because the people from Yehuda taught over the Gemara that they learned, and they ordered it over, they wrote it over, they didn't write it, they taught it over, and they reviewed it clearly, while the people from Galil did not. Similar to that, we learned that David HaMelech taught over what he learned, and therefore he had it clear. Shaul did not teach it over, and he did not have it clear. And that's why the pasuk describing the learning of David HaMelech says, Yire'echa yir'uni v'yismuchu ki lidvarcha yicholti. That's written actually by David HaMelech. It says that your fear, I feared and I rejoiced in your words, but Shaul didn't have it stated about him. It says, everything which he turned to. The simple pshat there is that he defeated his enemies, but what it means here, Yarshia, is that he got the wrong psak. He didn't give the halacha correctly because of the mistakes that he made. On the subject of Shaul, the Gemara says the fact that he killed out Noiv Kehanim was forgiven to him, like he said when he went and he raised Shmuel. Shmuel said that tomorrow you're going to be with me in the next world. Imi, with me, means with me in my mechitza, in my area, meaning that he will be together on the level of Shmuel, and therefore he will be forgiven for the mistakes that he made. Now, as far as, again, what the correct word in our Mishnah is, ma'abrin with an aleph or with an ayin, the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba said, if there would be anybody here from Yehuda, we could ask them, they will know. And also, there's another thing that I'd like to ask them. There is a Mishnah concerning a Bukhar where we have to check it and see if it has an injury. So you have to make it sit back on its haunches, and the word there is akuzoi. We don't know if it's akuzoi with an ayin or akuzoi with an aleph. So I would ask them that too. The Gemara says it actually was somebody, and they did ask him, and about both of these he said that there are different versions, there are multiple versions, some with an aleph and some with an ayin. And now the Gemara brings three examples of people who spoke clearly or unclearly. First of all, somebody from Yehuda who spoke very clearly with his language. And there was a fellow from Yehuda who wanted to sell a talus in the marketplace, and he went into the market and he said, I have a talus to sell. They asked him, what color is it? And he said, it's like beet leaves near the ground, meaning it's very specific. He said, low growing beet leaves, made sure that they clearly understood exactly what he meant. On the other hand, somebody from Galil, and now we have three examples of somebody from Galil who spoke unclearly. Somebody from Galil said, Amar Laman, Amar Laman. Now he wanted to say, does anybody have to tell me an Amar? But he mumbled, and he said, Amar, and they didn't know what he wanted. So they asked him, what are you talking about, you Galiloi, the Shaita? What are you saying? You want a Chamor, meaning a donkey, or do you want Chamar, meaning wine? Or do you want Amar, meaning wool? Or do you want Imar, meaning a sheep? What exactly do you want? Similar story, there was a woman who told her friend she wanted to say, come, I'll give you some milk to eat. Instead she said, shluchti tuchlin labia, which means you should be eaten by a female lion. There's another woman who went to a judge to complain that a square board was stolen from her, and she wanted to say, Mari Akiri, my master, Tavla Haya Li, I had a board, Uganavuch Minai, and Uganavuha Minai, it was stolen from me. Uchadein Havas, this was the size. The size was that if I would hold it, then it wouldn't reach the floor. Instead, what she ended up saying, because she didn't speak clearly, she said, Mari Kiri, my slave. She called the judge who she spoke to. She said, my slave. Tafla, obviously, I had a beam, and you stole it from me, and if you would be hanging from it, your feet wouldn't reach the floor. So that was not exactly the right thing to say to the judge, and it was a very negative situation. Gemara now brings 5 examples of people who spoke with hints and remazim and with great wisdom. First of all, the servant of Rebbe's house, sometimes she wanted the students to stay longer for the Suda, sometimes she wanted them to leave quickly because the Suda was over. So when she wanted them to leave, she said, look, the jug is banging the bottom of the wine barrel, meaning the wine barrel is empty, and therefore the eagles should fly home to the nest. It was a hint for them to go home because the Suda is over. However, when she wanted them to stay, she would say that we're soon going to open a new barrel and the jug will float to the surface, so therefore there's plenty of wine, there's more coming, so you could stay, don't feel pressure to leave. Rabbi Yossi bar Asyan would say the following thing: when they wanted him, he wanted them to make him beets in mustard, so he would use hints to the beets and hints to the mustard. So the word for beet is tar din, which is similar to the words shor b'mishpat. Shor is tor, and din is a mishpat. So he would say, make me a shor b'mishpat. And chardal is similar to the word har dal. Mustard is chardal, is har dal, which means a Nebuch mountain. So he would say, make me a tor miskain. So make me a shor mishpat and a tor miskain. That was his hint. When he wanted to ask about the health of the host is called the ushpiza, so he would use words which hinted at ish pi zeh. Ish pi zeh, man mouth this. He would say, gvar pum stain this, the man mouth this, is he still alive or not? It didn't mean anything in its natural language, but if you understood his hinting, then that's what he was referring to. Okay, Rabbi Avo would speak with tremendous wisdom. He would say, spread out the coals and put the one who speaks in the darkness over the red. Meaning he was saying you should roast a chicken, rooster, because they speak in the darkness, to announce the sun. Roasted over coals for me, please. That's what he asked. The Rabbanan asked Rabbi Avo, can you show us where Rabbi Eloi is? And we can't find him. And he said, Rabbi Eloi is very much joyful with a Nara, a girl who is Acharonis, Eronis, Hiniarte. A girl from a Kohanic family, Aharonis from Aaron, who's Aharonis, who's his second wife, who's Aaronis, who was very energetic, and she kept him up all night, and therefore he's asleep now. According to one shot, that's referring to a second wife that he actually married that he was hinting at. According to the other one, it's talking about a Masechta in Hilchos Kohanim that he learned, who is referring to as a wife. Now, the reverse of this is they actually asked Rabbi Eloi, where's Rabbi Avo? Because they said we couldn't find him either. So he said, well, he just got permission from the Nasi to have smicha, and therefore he went to learn by the big Talmid Chachamim in the south, who he called Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the Rebbe of David HaMelech, who was known for his Chachma. Learn has three stories of Rav Yeshua ben Chananya and one final one of Rabbi Saglili. Rav Yeshua ben Chananya says, nobody ever beat me in wordplay except for three incidents. One was a woman, one was a girl, and one was a boy. What's the stories? The one was as follows. I was staying in an inn, and the woman served me a bowl of beans 3 times. I finished the first 2, and the third time she had put in too much salt. It wasn't edible, so I ate a little bit, then I couldn't eat anymore, and she said to me, why aren't you eating? I said, well, I'm full already, I ate earlier. So she said, if that would be true, you wouldn't have eaten the bread either. So maybe the reason why you're not eating is because you forgot to leave over a little bit from the first 2 times that I gave you to eat. The halacha is you're supposed to leave a little bit over for the waiter as a tip, but you didn't do that, and therefore you're leaving it all over now. Problem is, don't you know the halacha that you don't leave payah from the plate, you leave payah, you don't leave payah from the pot, you leave payah from the plate, meaning you're supposed to leave a little bit over from each serving. You're not supposed to leave over one of the entire servings in the pot. That's not the right way to do it. So therefore she defeated Rav Yeshua ben Chananya in that. Next incident was that he was walking through a field along a road that went through the field, and a girl came up with him and said, "What, isn't this a private field? Why are you walking here?" And he said, "No, it's not. Look, you can see it as a very well-beaten track. Obviously, it's not a private field." So she said, "No, it is a private field, and the reason why that track is well-beaten because thieves like you keep walking on private property and making a well-beaten track." And the third story is where there was a child. He says he was walking along the way and he came to an intersection and there was a boy sitting there and he asked him which direction goes to the city. And he said this way is the long and short way and this way is the short which is long way. So he went on the way which is short but long. And when he got there, it was short. He got to the city right away, but he saw it was surrounded by fields and vineyards that he couldn't get through and he couldn't get into the city. He had to go back. So he said, why'd you tell me that was the short way? He said, I told you it was the short way, but he also told you that it was long in the end because it gets you to the city right away, but you can't get in. The better way is to go the other way, which is the long with short way. It takes a long time to get there, but once you get there, it's direct right in there, no trouble to get through the gates. And on that, he said, there's Ashreichem Yisrael, you have such Talmidei Chachamim, you have such Chachamim, even your great ones and your little children have such Chachma. And now the last story in the daf is Rabbi Saglili, who was traveling on the way to Lud, and he met Broria standing by the intersection, and he said to her, which direction goes to Lud? This is the famous incident quoted in Mesilas Yesharim. And she said to him, Glili shaita, what you are, don't you know that Pirkei Avos it says Al Tarbasicha Meisha, don't speak too long with women. You shouldn't have said Eze Derech Nelech Lud, just say Eze Lud. Minimize your words.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.